Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Dmitry Gozbinsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Geneva Trade Platform, and it is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome you to this second session in our FAO Geneva Trade Platform dialogue series on what the multilateral system can do to strengthen sustainability in agriculture. Before I go any further, let me point out that today's session is being translated into French and then back into English. For those of you connecting via Zoom, you can click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen to receive simultaneous translation. I believe one of our guests will be delivering remarks in French today. Those will be translated into English as well. As I said, this is the second event in our series. What we were trying to look at with this series, along with our partners at the FAO, is a critical question. No one denies that a sustainable transition in agriculture is absolutely critical. If it were not critical already, given the importance of agriculture around the world to lives and livelihoods, it would be made critical by the pressing challenges of climate change and the way it will affect farming methods, and the lives of farmers all over the world. Nowhere is this question more important than in least developed countries. LDCs, as they are known, have some of the highest percentage of workers that rely on the agricultural sector, either for subsistence or for their livelihoods, and as a chance to better themselves. And LDCs are also at some of the greatest risk for disruption from climate change and conflict. Disruptions to agricultural supply chains hit LDCs first and often hardest. And the changes from climate change that impact traditional farming methods are especially disruptive in least developed countries. Least developed countries also suffer from a lack of capital to address either rapidly or over the long term many of these challenges. And given the scale of this challenge, everyone has a role to play in trying to address these problems and bridge these gaps. And that very much includes the multilateral system. Our dialogue series, including this event today, asks what the multilateral system can do, whether that be at the WTO, whether that be at the FAO, or whether it be through the network of aid for trade and development organizations that form part of the multilateral web and framework to support LDCs and LDC governments in addressing their priorities when it comes to supporting a sustainable agricultural transition that improves their competitiveness, both domestically and in terms of exports. We have a fantastic agenda for you today, and I'm very pleased that you could join us for it. We will begin with Derek Carnegie, our consultant who has written the paper that will be released after this session, informing many of our discussions today. Having learned our lesson from last time, he will then take questions on that paper rather than leaving those to the panel's questions. So he is not forced to answer questions from the audience. So we'll be pleased to take questions. When it is time to take questions, we will take questions both from those in the audience here and those on Zoom. For those of you who are joining us in person, please simply raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. For those joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens to pose your questions, and our FAO colleague, Gare, will read them out to us when he is called upon to do so. After Derek's presentation and Q&A, we will move to our illustrious panel to really dive into these issues and hear about both the challenges and the potential solutions from a number of different angles. Before I introduce Derek, a couple of points of note, thanks, and housekeeping. As always, a big thank you to our own events team here at the Geneva Trade Platform, the FAO teams, both here in Geneva and in Rome, for making this series of events possible and for supporting us today. And of course, the Graduate Institute's own events staff who help us make this tick. I'd also like to plug two upcoming events. Tomorrow, the FAO at 11 o'clock Rome time is doing a hybrid event you can join virtually on the digitization of agri-food systems. which promises to be very interesting. And next month, culminating on the 10th of November, we'll be running a student hackathon for students from all over the world to work on developing the concept and the layout of digital applications that might be of use to sustainable agricultural transition, whether that is supporting policymakers or supporting farmers directly. We will be sending out the invitations for teams to register shortly. We will, of course, have prizes, and you absolutely do not need to be a coding genius to join. It is about the concept and the vision, not the C++ code. So with that out of the way, let me begin the substantive portion of our session by inviting to the stage Mr. Derek Carnegie to present his paper and take your questions. Derek, please.
Thank you very much for that. Good afternoon. I'll present briefly some of the main messages of this paper, which, as was just mentioned, cover the performance of agricultural exporting from least developed countries and suggest some strategies for enhancing trade and sustainability. Before beginning, I'd like to express my thanks to the GTP and FAO teams for their guidance and inputs in this paper. The current 46 least developed countries are defined as such by their low income levels, their low levels of human development, along with high levels of economic and environmental vulnerability. These are, however, a diverse set of countries. They are found around the world, though many are located in sub-Saharan Africa, and they also have very different economic structures. Speaking generally, though, agriculture tends to play a very important role in these economies and societies. Agriculture tends to make a very large contribution to GDP, to employment, and to trade. These countries also face serious threats to food security and the management of environmental threats, as was just mentioned in the introduction. For all of these reasons, the sustainable development of agriculture and agricultural exporting is particularly important to least developed countries. Looking at the issue of sustainability along three dimensions of economic, social development, and environmental sustainability, LDCs face a number of unique challenges. On the economic side, while LDCs export less than other countries, agriculture tends to be a more important contributor to exporting from LDCs than elsewhere. There is, however, the potential to increase exporting, either by selling more, to finding or diversifying export markets of LDCs, and also to increase the value of agricultural exports by improvements in quality and the extent of processing of agricultural and agri-food products. Opportunities in agriculture in these countries can also help to create inclusive growth, notably by supporting rural development and creating opportunities for women who tend to be employed and work in agriculture in relatively large numbers. In terms of social development, undernourishment and volatile food supplies affect many LDCs, particularly as many are becoming net food importers due to population growth exceeding agricultural productivity growth. And in terms of the environment, both mitigation and adaptation in agriculture are needed. LDC agriculture in some cases can be quite emissions intensive. Addressing environmental impacts would thus help to improve sustainability and create opportunities for certification with voluntary sustainability standards. At the same time, agriculture in many LDCs faces particular risks from climate change because of the geography of these countries and the limited management capacities. Investment and innovation are therefore needed to support adaptation. Just as an example, this figure illustrates a measure of country competitiveness in global agricultural markets. Many LDCs and developing regions, looking at the map, you can see sub-Saharan Africa stands out quite strongly, face difficulties in being competitive because of underdeveloped infrastructure and innovation, limited on-farm investment, and challenges in supporting farmers and agricultural value chains. LDCs account for close to 1.5% of global agricultural exports. While the share has increased and is greater than the LDC share of global non-agricultural exports, it's still quite low. This is in spite of some special arrangements that have been put in place to facilitate LDC involvement in global trade, including preferable terms of market access, particularly to developed country markets. That's what this figure on the right of the slide shows, that the percent of different products by sector from LDCs that are free of tariffs across different sectors of the economy, that agriculture is one of the least restrictive sectors. International cooperation also takes place through trade-related technical assistance, which helps LDCs to participate in the WTO and other multilateral fora, to implement their trade obligations, to defend their trade rights, and to negotiate on trade. The performance of LDCs in export agriculture, the challenges that they face, are the result of a combination of domestic and external constraints. Domestically, as mentioned, these include underinvestment in infrastructure, technology, and research, and also underinvestment in the associated supply chains, which holds back exports and prevents some of this additional value added that could take place domestically. We see the effects of this in low labor and land productivity in LDCs. This tends to be much lower or considerably lower than in the rest of the world. And underdeveloped supply chains further prevent this value addition and the formation of market connections in high potential export markets. This is just an example of that, looking at 3 important cereal products. It could be a bit challenging to see for some of those in the audience here. Looking at corn, rice, and wheat yields in LDCs and the rest of the world since the 1960s. That average LDC yields are lagging far behind the rest of the world, and the gaps are either growing or have not been closed in recent years. Looking at some of the external constraints to LDC agricultural exporting, despite the benefits of preferential market access, trade-related technical assistance, LDCs still face a number of significant external constraints that hold back their agricultural exporting. Of particular note are the impacts of non-tariff measures and subsidies. Non-tariff measures can, of course, be used in protecting the public interest, such as in pursuing public health and environmental goals. They can also help to build trust in traded goods by setting minimum standards for quality for packaging. However, non-tariff measures, and if we're looking at agriculture, we're especially looking at sanitary and phytosanitary, or SPS, and technical barriers to trade, or TBT measures. These can be particularly challenging for LDC exporters to comply with. Domestic support provided to agriculture by other countries also negatively affects the performance of LDC exports. This primarily happens through depressing global prices and through distorting competition. The strategies for addressing these domestic and external constraints could include action on, speaking quite broadly, on trade rules, on increased aid for the sector, on cooperation on the improvement of quality management and related systems, while taking care to address the concerns of countries following LDC graduation and helping them through the transition as they lose some of the benefits that are associated with that status. First, in terms of multilateral trade and regional trade agreements, multilateral fora provide a platform for addressing regulatory harmonization and other issues of concern to LDCs, such as food security. Regional trade agreements can help to solve some of the external challenges faced by LDCs. Regional agreements include, a number of regional agreements include special arrangements for LDCs on agricultural trade and food security, for example. Of particular note here is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, AFCFTA, a new agreement that has the potential to benefit many African LDCs, though limitations in the extent of liberalization and delays in implementation remain challenges to its success. Second, there's a need for greater assistance targeting sustainable agriculture. increased aid to agricultural development through technical assistance, capacity building assistance, and trade-related technical assistance would help in addressing some of the key domestic constraints and could go a long way towards meeting ODA targets, in particular those associated with the SDG target 17.2, which calls for official development assistance flows of 0.15 to 0.2% of GNI to LDCs, which of course is not being met by most developed countries. And third, domestic reform and international cooperation can support improvements to LDC quality management and associated systems. Effective institutions and capacities at the farm and firm level are needed to support improvements in quality. Support for compliance with voluntary standards as well provides opportunities for market diversification and increasing export income. A comprehensive perspective is needed, however, since quality, traceability, and marketing are all connected and mutually dependent. Finally, support should be designed with consideration of the needs of countries following LDC graduation. Transitional arrangements may be needed to assist countries that are losing access to special arrangements following graduation. Thank you for your attention. We'll turn to a few questions if there are any in the audience or from online. And otherwise, I think we'll move on as there should be an opportunity, I believe, for questions of the panel at a later point.
I don't see any questions in the room, but I might throw you one just to not let you off the hook too easily. You mentioned on one of your slides that the AFCFTA has the potential to improve LDC agricultural performance. Could you talk through how? What are you picturing in terms of the AFCFTA's effect, and what would the benefits be?
I think one of the key benefits that can be highlighted is that of improving food security. That, of course, one of the key benefits of trade is the opportunity to balance out shocks that, environmental shocks, for example, that may take place in one region but not another. And so the opportunity to balance this out through regional trade, through closer trade connections, is something that the AFCFTA and similar regional trade agreements can do that would make a big difference for LDCs.
Thank you very much, Derek. Dominique from FAO. When you are talking indeed of the moment there is the graduation, the LDC graduation, and you refer to transitional arrangements, which transitional arrangements you have in mind in particular?
Thanks, that's a good question. I think that, of course, there are a number of arrangements in place that provide some continuation of some of these market access or other benefits offered to LDCs, continuation of trade-related technical assistance, and especially a shifting of trade-related technical assistance to help the economy prepare for the country to prepare for these changes that come into place. That, of course, it's not just about the potentially more restrictive market access that's faced or a more challenging environment, but also just a shift in the trade rules that has to be accounted for. And so preparing policymakers and the private sector for this kind of preparation is key, or for this kind of shift is key. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek. It's now my pleasure to move to the panel portion of today's event and to begin by introducing our illustrious panel. I'm hoping we can get our colleagues from online up on the screen. But for now, let me introduce our colleagues who are here with us in the flesh. We have for us from the Permanent Mission of Senegal to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, Mr. Omar Cissé. Thank you for joining us. And we have as well with us from the Enhanced Integrated Framework, its Deputy Executive Director of the Secretariat of the EIF, Ms. Annette Sesmawemba. Hope I was vaguely close. And joining us online, hovering above us, we have from the FAO, Angelica Giacomi-Daza, the Director of the Office of SIDS, LDCs, and LLDCs. So that is Small Island Developing States, Least Developed Countries, and Landlocked Developing Countries. Welcome. We have with us Mr. Axel Adi, the founder and CEO of the EcoCap Investment Group and the former Trade Minister of Liberia, who oversaw that country's accession to the WTO. And we have Mr. Ahmad Balim, the Senior Program Officer from the Global Policy and Multilaterals Group of the Agricultural Development Unit of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I hope I got that vaguely close. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a lot to cover today in terms of these important issues and how to support LDCs. And I think it is proper and correct to start with the LDCs themselves and to turn to Mr. Cisse. Any progress towards improving sustainable agriculture in LDCs has to be driven by the interests and ideas of the LDCs themselves. So I wonder if you could share with us some of the areas that you think as the agricultural focal point for the LDC group at the WTO, that the multilateral system can better support LDCs in sustainably improving their agricultural competitiveness. No.
Allô? Voilà, merci beaucoup Dimitri. Je voudrais d'abord remercier la FAO et les organisateurs d'avoir bien voulu nous inviter à cet important événement. Alors, comment le système multilatéral peut-il aider les paiements à améliorer durablement leur compétitivité? Voilà une grosse question. Et avant toute chose, il convient de rappeler que la préoccupation première de la majorité des paiements dans le domaine de l'agriculture est d'assurer leur propre sécurité alimentaire, et notamment la disponibilité et l'accessibilité des denrées alimentaires de base à des prix abordables. En effet, la grande majorité des paiements sont des importateurs nets de produits alimentaires. Aujourd'hui, sur les 25 dernières années, ces importations représentaient un montant équivalent en moyenne à près de 30% de l'ensemble des exportations de biens, des paiements, mais cela varie considérablement d'un pays à l'autre. Pour le Sénégal, par exemple, sur ces 25 dernières années, les importations de produits alimentaires représentaient plus de 70% de tout ce que le pays exporte. Et pour plusieurs paiements, celles-ci représentent souvent plus de 100% de toute leur exportation de biens. Même parmi les paiements qui exportent plus qu'ils n'importent, la faim et la malnutrition restent une préoccupation première. Alors, la pandémie de la COVID-19 a eu des effets dévastateurs à cet égard. Et la crise énergétique et des prix des produits alimentaires que nous connaissons aujourd'hui accentue encore les problèmes rencontrés, comme le montrent les derniers chiffres alarmants du nombre de personnes souffrant de malnutrition. Alors, cette réalité a plusieurs implications. Premièrement, cela veut dire que les paiements doivent à la fois améliorer leur production agricole domestique, tout en garantissant l'accès à la nourriture dont leur population dépend sur les marchés mondiaux. Ceci s'avère particulièrement difficile, je l'avoue, en période de perturbation commerciale et de volatilité excessive des prix, comme nous le vivons depuis 3 ans et comme nous l'avons vécu de manière intermittente entre 2006 et 2013. De ce point de vue-là, le défi consiste non seulement à booster la productivité agricole des paiements, mais également à renforcer la résilience et la préparation à long terme pour répondre aux futures crises sur les prix et autres perturbations des chaînes d'approvisionnement qui sont désormais des problèmes récurrents. Alors, la deuxième implication, c'est que toute discussion concernant la durabilité environnementale doit être appréhendée sous l'angle de la sécurité alimentaire. et la nécessité d'assurer les moyens de subsistance des producteurs agricoles qui représentent une part considérable de l'emploi dans les paiements. La principale considération dans ce domaine n'est pas de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Donc ça, il faut bien le noter. L'ensemble des émissions liées à l'agriculture, des 47 paiements réunis, qui abritent 1 milliard de personnes les plus pauvres et les plus vulnérables du monde, ne représentent qu'environ 2% des émissions mondiales. Historiquement, les paiements sont ceux qui ont le moins contribué au changement climatique. Mais malheureusement, ceux qui souffrent le plus de ces répercussions. Malgré cela, les paiements ont pris des engagements de réduction de leurs émissions dans le cadre de l'accord de Paris, y compris dans le domaine de l'agriculture. Alors, en vertu du principe de responsabilité commune mais différenciée, les paiements ne devraient pas être contraints à des efforts supplémentaires dans ce domaine. En revanche, le secteur agricole des paiements est frappé de plein fouet par les effets du changement climatique et les désastres naturels qui en résultent. Au cours des 20 dernières années, les paiements ont été frappés par 1730 catastrophes naturelles différentes, affectant 450 millions de personnes et entraînant des pertes économiques de plus de 50 milliards de dollars US. Alors, une large part de ces catastrophes est directement liée au changement climatique et est appelée à s'intensifier dans le futur. Au-delà des dommages directs au capital physique, tels que les infrastructures commerciales, les catastrophes naturelles affectent également directement la capacité de production des paiements et par conséquent leur capacité à exporter des biens et des services. La plupart des estimations montrent que les paiements devraient connaître un déficit croissant de production de fruits, légumes, racines et tubercules et une réduction généralement plus importante de la consommation par rapport au reste du monde. Outre les questions d'adaptation et de résilience, les paiements sont confrontés à d'autres défis environnementaux, à commencer par l'accès à l'eau, la désertification ou la pollution au plastique, qui de plus en plus se trouvent non seulement dans les océans, mais également sur la terre et en fin de compte dans nos assiettes. Alors, au vu de ces défis, comment le système multilatéral peut-il aider les paiements à assurer la disponibilité et l'accessibilité des denrées alimentaires de base, tout en renforçant leur résilience aux chocs extérieurs? Comme nous l'avons vu, il s'agit ici à la fois d'accroître la production agricole et la productivité dans les paiements, tout en assurant l'accès aux denrées alimentaires de base sur les marchés internationaux en même temps. En temps de crise, la difficulté tient en partie au fait que les disciplines actuelles de l'OMC reflètent essentiellement le contexte économique qui prévalait il y a plusieurs décennies et caractérisé par une surproduction agricole et des prix en constant déclin. Aujourd'hui, la préoccupation majeure vient davantage de la volatilité des prix, d'une tendance persistante à la flambée des prix et des problèmes liés à l'approvisionnement. Il s'agit donc de repenser certaines approches ou du moins de les compléter. Par exemple, pour garantir l'accès aux denrées alimentaires, un premier pas consisterait à repenser la décision de Marrakech sur les pays importateurs nets de produits alimentaires. Comme il est apparu lors des discussions qui ont mené à la déclaration de la CM12 sur l'insécurité alimentaire, cette décision ne correspond plus aux défis d'aujourd'hui et s'est avérée largement insuffisante, inefficace. Plus spécifiquement, le système commercial multilatéral devrait explorer la nécessité d'exempter les paiements des restrictions à l'exportation imposées par les exportateurs nets de produits alimentaires, comment réformer l'aide alimentaire pour assurer l'accès à la nourriture en temps de crise sans concurrencer les producteurs locaux, quels sont les impacts de la décision de Nairobi sur la concurrence à l'exportation, sur la capacité des paiements à financer des niveaux normaux d'importation, quel est le rôle de la détention de stocks à des fins de sécurité alimentaire et faut-il autoriser l'exportation de stocks à bas prix par les paiements dans le cadre d'accords intergouvernementaux? Comment renforcer l'accès des paiements aux mécanismes de financement des importations et aux garanties crédits à l'importation? Sur ces questions, Le système commercial multilatéral peut également jouer un rôle pour améliorer la transparence et les informations sur la production, les prix, les stocks et le commerce, y compris les mesures de politique commerciale affectant les cultures essentielles. Promouvoir des mesures de réponse rapide coordonnées en temps de crise entre les principales institutions internationales, notamment la FAO, le FMI, la Banque mondiale et le PAM, le Programme alimentaire mondial. Encourager également la coopération des organisations internationales pour financer les niveaux normaux d'importation alimentaire dans les paiements face au choc des prix de l'offre. Alors, concernant la disponibilité maintenant des denrées alimentaires, la priorité doit être accordée au renforcement de la productivité et la compétitivité agricole dans les paiements. Ici, le système commercial multilatéral a un rôle crucial à jouer, notamment les mesures commerciales, y compris les restrictions à l'exportation affectant les importations et l'accès aux intrants, par exemple les semences et les engrais. Parce qu'en fait, nous ne croyons pas à l'aide, nous croyons à un partenariat gagnant-gagnant. Et donc, il est temps que les paiements produisent ce qu'ils consomment. Et pour cela, ils ont besoin d'accéder aux engrais, aux semences, aux pesticides, à tous les intrants. Ils ont également besoin d'assistance technique et de renforcement des capacités pour améliorer la capacité de production agricole et les infrastructures, notamment dans le cadre de l'aide au commerce. L'accès et la diffusion des technologies clés également, et également la promotion du développement et de la diversification des chaînes d'approvisionnement. Alors, plus généralement, on sait que le soutien massif à l'agriculture, notamment par les pays développés, et de plus en plus certains pays émergents découragent depuis des années l'investissement dans l'agriculture, en particulier dans les paiements. Effectivement, un problème particulier réside dans la concentration de ces soutiens sur un nombre limité de produits de base d'importance particulière pour des paiements. Cela fait l'objet de négociations à l'OMC depuis plus de 20 ans, au cours desquelles les paiements ont systématiquement insisté sur la nécessité de réduction substantielle du soutien interne et des limites au soutien par produit. Mais à l'exception d'un accord partiel sur les subventions à l'exportation, cette question malheureusement n'avance pas. Et finalement, il conviendrait de réfléchir à la mise en place d'un mécanisme efficace permettant de compenser également l'impact négatif de la volatilité des prix lorsque ceux-ci chutent et sont accompagnés de poussées des importations. Les travaux de la FAO tendent en effet à montrer que les paiements sont plus souvent affectés par des épisodes de chute de prix et d'afflux massifs d'importation que la plupart des autres pays. Et de plus, contrairement aux pays développés, les paiements ne disposent pas véritablement d'autres instruments que la protection tarifaire pour aider leurs producteurs à faire face à de tels épisodes. Cette question est également débattue depuis longtemps à l'OMC sans qu'un consensus ne puisse se dégager. Alors, en attendant une solution à long terme, il pourrait être intéressant de réfléchir à une solution partielle permettant au moins au paiement de lutter contre l'effet de distorsion des échanges générés par les subventions massives à l'agriculture. Il s'agirait d'établir une procédure simplifiée permettant l'application par les pays en développement et les paiements de mesures de sauvegarde ou de droits compensateurs sur les importations de produits agricoles subventionnés. Alors, ce mécanisme partiel ne s'appliquerait qu'aux importations qui rentrent en compétition déloyale avec nos producteurs domestiques. Il constituerait également une alternative viable au système existant de mesures compensatoires que la plupart des paiements n'arrivent pas à employer car bien trop complexes. Là, je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you so much it's quite a comprehensive picture, I think, of both the scale of the challenge, where some of the individual pain points lie for least developed countries, but also what different aspects of the system, beginning with FAO and ending with WTO membership, could potentially do. A couple of things that really struck me was when you spoke about this challenge of some LDCs that are even exporting more than they are importing in terms of food. So they are net exporters of food, are still facing challenges with effectively food poverty, which is a food systems way of thinking about these challenges, which resonates closely with what our first event in this series especially our FAO colleagues, urged us to think about these issues in terms of interconnected food systems and not simply about production numbers and imports versus exports. So I found that to be very striking. Also, it struck me how many of the challenges that you outlined are those that the Director General of the WTO herself has named short-term priorities for her in terms of challenging food insecurity and seeing what can be done in the short and medium term, as you say, while the search for a more long-term solution works its way through the various systems. So I thank you very, very much for that intervention. I think it gave me, and I hope our panel and our audience, a lot to think about. To build on some of the themes and to again bring this back to food systems and food security, I wanted to bring in our one of our panelists from Rome, Angelica from the FAO. Sustainably improving agricultural outcomes and food systems has been a strong focus for the FAO for as long as there's been an FAO. And I wonder if you could share some of your findings on where the gaps might be and what possible solutions could look like.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. At the outset, it's important to touch upon the status of agriculture in least developed countries. As highlighted by previous speakers, agriculture is the mainstay of most LDC economies. It accounts for a large share of gross domestic product, employs a large proportion of the labor force, represents a major source of foreign exchange, supplies the bulk of basic food, and provides subsistence and income to more than half of the LDC population. Agriculture, forestry, and fishing represent approximately 21% of value added as percentage of gross domestic product for the LDCs from 2011 to 2018. Value added per worker in agriculture increased by 12% between 2011 and 2018, rising from approximately 769.8 to 86.4, pressed in constant 2010 dollars. Fertilizer consumption has increased between 2011 and 2016 from 26.6 kilograms per hectare of arable land to 27.2, but was still well below the average for other developing countries. Globally, the share of agriculture in total production and employment has declined at different speeds and poses different challenges across the regions, but particularly in LDCs. Despite its importance to the economy, agriculture in LDCs has remained largely underdeveloped in production for both the domestic market and for export. The share of agriculture products in LDC exports increased from 10% in 2011 to 14% in 2020. The European Union was the main destination of exports in 2011, share of 22%, and the second position in 2020, second position is China. China is now the main destination in 2020. The second position in 2011 increased market share for LDC agricultural products from 13% in 2011 to 24% in 2020. In 2011-2020, India was in third position, followed by Vietnam in fourth. Saudi Arabia completed the top 5 in 2011, while Thailand was ranked 5th in 2020. The top 10 destinations accounted for 82% of LDC exports of agricultural products in 2020. Slow production and growth and sharp annual fluctuations in agriculture output have continued to be chronic problems for the LDCs, constituting the main causes of their persistent poverty and rising food insecurity. However, needed acceleration in productivity growth is hampered by, among other things, the degradation of natural resources, the loss of biodiversity, the spread of transboundary pests and diseases of plants and animals, some of which are becoming resistant to antimicrobials, and the limited capacity, technology, and financial resources. Food loss and waste claim a significant proportion of agriculture output, and reducing them would lessen the need for significant production increases. In terms of food security and nutrition, on the average, the prevalence of undernourishment in LDCs has hovered around 22% since 2010, while the world has been under 10% and currently stands about 9.8%. For 10 LDCs, undernourishment rates have remained persistently above 40%, and for some of them, well over 50% during the same period. Structural features of the economy of LDCs contribute to their vulnerability. These features include low productivity in the agriculture and food sector, high post-harvest loss, both of which result in an increased dependency on food imports. Many LDCs depend on global markets for a large and growing part of their food needs. Cereals comprise the largest group in the food import basket, accounting for approximately 42% of the value of the food imports, followed by oils and fats and sugars. Collectively, the three commodities account for over 3/4 of the value of food items imported by LDCs. The share of food imports in total merchandise exports was 25% on average for LDCs as a whole in recent years, substantially higher than the global average of around 5%. The difficulties of many LDCs in affording adequate quantities of food from the global market are influenced in part by the performance of their export sectors. As a group, LDCs are net agricultural importers and highly dependent on agricultural trade. They also depend on the imports of essential agricultural inputs, in particular fertilizers, for which the prices surged in 2022. The high concentration of exports and a small number of agricultural products makes LDCs vulnerable to volatility in global agricultural markets and trade policy measures of the major exporters. Disruptions in international transportation infrastructure and supply chains, such as those experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, increase their vulnerability and render them prone to frequent food emergencies that aggravate an already precarious situation. With regards to food emergencies, LDCs are the most affected group of countries, accounting for close to 70% of all global food emergencies in the period from 2011 to 2022. Regarding the challenges and opportunities, in many LDCs, agricultural transformation is needed to stimulate economic development and improve domestic food security and nutrition. However, these efforts in these countries to increase agricultural productivity and develop inclusive and competitive agriculture value chains are often hampered by market and trade-related bottlenecks. While initiatives to promote agricultural commoditization, diversification, and trade are often constrained by the bottlenecks at the farm or post-harvest level. These bottlenecks often result from or are exacerbated by the misalignment between domestic agriculture and trade-related policies. Additional internal difficulties contributing to low productivity include rigid production structures, limited skill space, short life expectancy, and low educational qualifications, as well as poor infrastructure and an inadequate institutional and policy framework. At the same time, with the growing integration of markets from globalization and trade liberalization, their economies have to operate in an increasingly competitive external environment. They continue to export a narrow range of primary commodities that are highly vulnerable to instability of demand and deteriorating terms of trade. Compounding this fact that external existence of agriculture in LDCs has declined, as was previously mentioned, several factors are behind this shift, including changing donor priorities, pressure from the environmental groups, and insufficient evidence of its contribution to increasing productivity. Even if ODA has remained stagnant relative to other sectors, it still represents an important source of funding for many LDC economies, especially in Central and West Africa, which still rely on ODA as a significant source of financing for the development of their agricultural sector. In addition to the urgent needs for the increases in productivity, the agriculture sector in LDCs must also embrace sustainable practices. The agriculture sector is facing mounting environmental challenges, including changing climatological patterns, water shortages, treatment-resistant plagues, and increased incidence of natural disasters. On the one hand, the sector contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, natural habitat loss, and unsustainable use of water resources, among others. And reducing the environmental impact would require important investments. On the other hand, agriculture is strongly affected by climate change and extreme climatological or meteorological events. Significant resources are needed for adaptation and mitigation. The inability of LDCs to compete not only in the world market, but also in the domestic markets is reflected in the rising food import bills. Integrating the LDCs into the world economy represents an enormous challenge, including marginalization from global markets, adapting to technological change, and coping with a new institutional environment. These factors, combined with an increased food demand caused by population growth and changing consumption preferences, could translate into important threats for food security in LDCs. Global food supplies were dealt yet another blow following the war in Ukraine, which is a significant exporter of wheat, maize, sunflower oil, and other food products. Moreover, the Russian Federation is among the major fertilizer exporters in the world. Most LDCs have enormous untapped agricultural potential to meet these challenges with considerable scope for more effective use of resources and higher productivity. Therefore, a renewed focus on agriculture and rural development is needed. In terms of the way forward, a coherent, comprehensive vision of agriculture rural development is key. The design, implementation, and review of a series of measures to boost investment in agriculture that may be considered include maintaining sound and stable macroeconomic trade policies that encourage investment in agriculture, strengthening human capital and capacity, particularly in rural areas, establishing a strong institutional environment that improves access to markets, ensures dissemination of information, sets standards, and provides an adequate legal and regulatory framework, enabling research and extension services to develop cost-effective, productive, and robust technologies, upgrading the marketing, transport, communication infrastructure to support farmers to access seasonal and long-term capital and inputs, and providing them with strong price incentives. And lastly, safeguarding natural resources and the environment. These measures on the part of LDCs can be rendered more effective with an increase in development and other forms of assistance to assist LDCs in meeting public investment needs in agriculture. Current initiatives to provide financial assistance to LDCs through targeted debt relief and other means could be partly channeled towards supporting efforts to develop their sustainable agriculture potential. In particular, by strengthening research, development, extension services, ensuring the availability of essential inputs and structured commodity finance, and by providing marketing assistance. Also, supporting LDC efforts to facilitate the transfer of technology, the flow of foreign direct investment that will improve agricultural productivity and competitiveness. Facilitate market access of LDC agricultural commodities in developing countries, notably by improving terms of trade, adapting multilateral trade rules to the institutional, human capital, and infrastructural context of LDCs, and assisting in developing product quality, pre- and post-production standards. Raising yields in food production LDCs is an issue that should be central in the array of measures to improve food security and increase the share of LDCs in global food exports. The policy mix that individual countries may use would depend on their specific circumstances. However, it should be noted that targeted investment assistance to agriculture has proven effective in achieving rapid increase in input. Significant progress in promoting economic growth, reducing poverty, and enhancing food security at LDCs cannot be achieved without drawing more fully on the potential of human and productive capacity of the agriculture sector and enhancing its contribution to the overall economic and social development. With the support of development partners, the government of LDCs may need to rethink their agriculture and rural development, as well as trade and market strategies, if they are to achieve the sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angelica. I think a really comprehensive set of data and facts to support much of what Mr. Cisse laid out in terms of the challenges facing LDCs, as well as a comprehensive and I would say daunting but vital outline of what solutions could look like and what solutions would require. Just one thing out of many that jumped out at me from your presentation was thinking that share of imports within LDCs of food products, and just the natural corollary of that, which is their dependence, or rather their vulnerability to price shocks. If your reliance on imports is that much higher than the average, then of course you are by nature even more vulnerable than other countries to global price shocks as the price of commodities fluctuates. And I think that's an especially sobering thought, given the price volatility that's happening now and the way it mirrors the price volatility periods that Mr. Cisse raised earlier. But you did finish on the role of development agencies and the role of the multilateral system to find solutions, which I think is a good segue to Annette and the enhanced integrated framework. The EIF is something of a unique beast, one I've had the privilege to be working with and alongside for quite some time. There are many organizations that prioritize least developed countries, but I believe the EIF may be one of the only multilateral organizations that works on their needs exclusively. And I know that agriculture is a big focus for the EIF. So I wonder if you could begin first by telling us a little bit about the EIF and the kind of work the organization does and how it does it, and then talk us through some of the interventions you've seen, whether the EIFs or others, that bear fruit when it comes to improving LDC food systems and competitiveness.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dimitri. And I would like to thank Derek as well for his presentation, and Omar and Angelica as well. And as I listened, I couldn't stop to think about how huge a task there is to be done in this sector. About the EIF. The EIF is a partnership program. So we bring together the 46 or so countries that have been mentioned as least developed countries. We bring together resources from funding partners, and we bring together technical capacity from international agencies such as the World Bank, UNDP, ITC, UNCTAD, and others, so that together we try to unblock the challenges that prevent least developed countries from accessing opportunities that are available in the global markets. And how do we do this? First, we try to help understand, we help countries understand where the key challenges lie. And we do that through undertaking analytical work. We, through our studies referred to as the diagnostic trade integration studies, look at the constraints, both institutional and to particular sectors. And having identified those constraints, we also try to identify what are the actions that are necessary to address those constraints. And this study is made available so that countries can refer to it in trying to determine their priorities. And in trying to unblock some of the institutional challenges, we make sure that the different LDCs, especially through the ministries of trade, have the right people to support policy formulation processes, that they have mechanisms in place to foster dialogue between the private and public sector, within the donors, to point and to put a focus on key challenges that constrain trade. And in so doing, we've had people placed in ministries of trade, for instance, technical experts. We've also helped formulate policies. We've helped mainstream trade into development plans. And on the productive side of work, and this is very much related to the discussion we're having today, we look at specific sectors. Most of those will have been identified through that analytical piece of work that I spoke about. And we then try to provide some catalytic investments. These sectors need a lot of funding to be able to create change across a whole value chain. So our funding is really catalytic to demonstrate that if the potential of that sector is unlocked, that sector could deliver a lot of value for the countries. So that's a whole lot of work that we do on our productive capacity. And on the topic, and as I listened to both Omar and Angelica, and of course from the study that we had earlier, a lot of the solutions that are being proposed are areas where the EIF is working. We've tried to take a value chain approach, looking at farmers, for instance, what do they need? And looking at beyond the farmers, the wholesalers, the exporters that reach the market. How can we help unblock some of the challenges that we have had? And so with the farmers, in a number of countries where we work, we have provided new seeds, for instance, so that they can be increased productivity. And I'll give a few examples in a couple of hours. we've provided technology. For example, in the mango sector in West Africa, where we know there's lots of mangoes, during the mango season, they are practically left to rot. So what have we done? Provided technology that is cheap, that is sustainable, such as solar drying technology, so that they can produce dry mango, and helped also to be able to package this dry mango and let them to markets abroad where they can sell the dry mango. Different products have come from that sector, mango pulp, dried mango, and we've done a lot of this in West Africa. In other countries, we've infused technology. For example, in Bhutan. In Bhutan, they produce a lot of potatoes, which they export to countries such as India and countries such as China. They exported these potatoes at very, very low cost because they didn't have a process that allowed them to be able to offer a better, to obtain a better price. So we supported them with a technology option that allows them to auction them online so that they get a better price. And we've had the issue of pricing as a major challenge. The online platform allows them to be able to collect through their cooperatives the quantity of potatoes available and to market it as a lot so that they get a better price. Now, those are a few of the examples in the technology front, but I'll talk about an example in Malawi, where we started with supporting their national export strategy, where they identified oil seeds and soybean and groundnuts as a key sector for export. We then helped work with a cooperative within Malawi that works within these sectors. And through working with that cooperative and distributing new seeds, we saw a rise in the productivity in Malawi of up to about 42% for soya and for groundnuts. A number of farmers were trained in quality management systems, but also in the processing, the threshing. Some of the technologies that have been provided are quite simple and very, very easy to use for farmers that are based in rural areas. And as a result, we saw improved grain quality, farmers improved their standards, and their credibility on the local and regional markets improved. In Cambodia, and I came from Cambodia recently, we spoke to farmers that are in the rice sector. And in this sector, what we supported was a strategy to increase productivity of rice. That strategy has been implemented through very, very strong sector associations in the rice sector. And as a result, there's been increases in the acreage of rice in the country. And you may not be aware, but Cambodia rice exports increased by over 400% between 2011 and 2020, and very, very high values of up to 450 million by 2020. Again, this was us planting the seed as the EIF in Cambodia through a strategy process leading to identification of the right partners, and the right partners rolling out a program of support to rural farmers. You will also know that this rice is organic and attracts a premium price on the market. Cassava sector as well in Cambodia, that's another sector where we have worked, but some really interesting examples as well in Togo. And in Togo, we've it was again in the soybean. They were the first export of soybean to the European Union. And for us, that's really important because European Union hadn't received any soybean exports from an LDC. And again, what we have done is nurturing the value chain, starting from the farmers through to the exporters, and making sure that they have access to markets, making sure that we're trying to unblock some of the challenges along those markets. We've had also some challenges that have been expressed around standards, and that's an area where we've worked as well. For example, in Senegal, and we just heard from Omar, we've helped establish an standards infrastructure through making available the possibility to undertake a number of tests so that the products that are being developed can access international markets. As I said earlier, these investments are only a drop in the ocean. What's needed is a lot more. We are only reaching very few farmers, working through very few cooperatives, simply because the resources we have are stretched over 46 countries, and we don't want to leave any country behind. We want to make sure that we can influence in each country and just demonstrate that these investments can deliver value. And I think the challenge that remains is, how do we reach the unreached? How do we continue to unblock many more sectors? In these countries that I have mentioned, it's only 1 or 2 sectors where we have worked, but there are very, very many other sectors of potential. And I think extending the work of the EIF, but also extending ODA, as we heard from Angelica, so that we can reach more sectors, so that we can reach women who are involved and are working in the fields. We can tap into the possibilities of digital technologies. In a few countries like Rwanda, a number of solutions such as apps that guide farmers to weather patterns, to availability of seed, to use of fertilizers, all of these are available. In Rwanda, we've helped to support those apps being used and used for demonstration, but there's a lot more that can be done for sure. So I hope that gives you a flavor, Dimitri, of the work that we are doing in the agriculture sector. We would like to do more, and we hope that through partnerships, such as with FAO, we've had quite a number of conversations with FAO and with many other partners that we work. Oh, I'll give one final example on partnerships. With the Islamic Trade Finance Corporation in Guinea, we supported, and in the Gambia, we supported in the groundnut sector to look at this challenge of aflatoxins and helping so that aflatoxins are not a challenge and that the groundnuts can obtain a better and premium price on the international markets, and that was very successful. But the acreage was very, very tiny. We only sort of tried to demonstrate that if we can invest in this sector, it can deliver value in the Gambia and in Guinea. So again, for us, some of the key success factors have been partnerships, working together with countries. All of our work is led and fully led by the countries. They own the programs, they identify the sectors. We only come in to provide the resources so that those sectors can improve. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. As you say, it's just a flavor of what the EIF does. Asking you to list everything the EIF does, even in one sector, would indeed take hours. I was particularly struck by how many of the interventions you described were, I'm sure they weren't simple to implement, but they weren't sort of hugely high tech or massive either, whether you were talking about organizing potato growers to pool their work into lots and to begin auctioning off their products, or drying racks for mangoes. When you talk to farmers in developed countries about the levels of investment they have to do to eke out a 3 or 4% productivity increase, you're talking about massive capital expenditure, full digitization, drone technology. Whereas here, I think the EIF is a really good blueprint for how, while there's a lot more to be done, even individual interventions, as long as they're well targeted and developed in partnership with the LDCs themselves, as part of an export strategy, can really transform the lives of the people that you touch and make a real difference. So I thank you very much for sharing that. I might now turn back to above me, to Axel Adi. Mr. Adi, you were the chief negotiator for Liberia's WTO accession. You championed the potential of the multilateral system to be a force multiplier for your country. And I know agriculture is a primary source of livelihood there. I wonder if you could share, as you always do, practically and pragmatically, what can the system do to help farmers in countries like yours? And are there any areas of policy or aid for trade where you'd like to see significantly greater efforts or greater focus?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dimitri and the Geneva Trade Platform for the invitation. It's an honor to be a part of this discussion. I believe this discussion is timely, and I want to build on what the other speakers have stated, a lot of the data they've provided. But these days I often wondered, what is it we can do more of to improve agriculture outcomes? What can the system do more of to improve agriculture outcomes? And I just go back to my experience. So I'm going to give you some practical examples. All across LDCs, you notice that when it comes to export and the structure of LDCs export, particularly in Africa, you will find that a lot of it is driven by cash crops export to global value chains. And if you were to take a country like mine and just look at cocoa and rubber, which are major drivers of GDP, you will see that there's huge capacity and investment and a lot of innovation around these two commodities. And I often wondered, what lessons can we learn from that experience? All across Africa, if you look at the structure of exports and when it comes to agricultural commodity, you see there's extensive investment, there's a lot of innovation, and there's scalability for exports. Cocoa, rubber, coffee, driving GDPs across the continent. And so I believe there are some lessons learned. And why is it important now? Because I truly believe that food insecurity is the greatest threat to peace and security in LDCs. Most ministers in LDCs today are dealing with the challenges of price volatility. I mean, in Liberia, 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was issues of shortages of rice that led to huge price increases that took people to the streets. And so these are pressing challenges that countries are faced with. How do we use the multilateral trading system to find a way to address some of these challenges? And I think it can be done in a number of ways. And I think some of this has already been done. I think one of the outcomes for the MC12 ministerial is the draft ministerial declaration on trade and food security. We try to look at ways of bringing members together to come up with new innovations around domestic production and export diversification, again, to build some resilience to shocks. And many LDCs are faced with the shocks of COVID they're recovering from. It's the shock of conflict that is impacting our global value chains and contributing to huge price inflation. Fuel in Liberia, I think the price went up by 40%. And then you have the issue of really having access to inputs, which is impacting the agriculture sector. So I want to highlight a number of key recommendations. Liberia is a country that has vast arable land, but it's only using 20% for agriculture. 18% of the households in Liberia are facing severe food insecurity, or moderate to severe food insecurity. And we're a major exporter of rubber, and we're also exporting cocoa. There's a lot of work that was done around working with Aid for Trade, working with the EIF, with the DTIS to look at what are some of the constraints that are getting in the way of our vision of really diversifying the Liberian economy to really build in resilience for global shocks. But the investments that is needed urgently is investment in food production. One member state decide to put restriction on exports, directly impact countries that are net importers of cereals. And that translates into a risk of conflict in a lot of these countries. So first, I think, congratulations to the DG for achieving the outcomes at MC12. Now, how do we translate, for example, this draft declaration into a convening mechanism that can result in some commitments. And those commitments in terms of, one, how do we build the incentive? How do we incentivize the private sector to bring in new innovation that will lead to food production, particularly staple crop production? So Liberia is a rice importer. We spend a huge percentage of our foreign exchange on importation of rice and importation of fuel. Fuel prices goes up, the cost of food goes up along with it because the transportation of agricultural produce and the inputs. So the WTO as a convener, how does it rally not only development partners, but the private sector to look at innovations that are perhaps transferable? And the biggest thing here is scalability. We've done a lot of innovations helping small scale farmers, SMEs, to access whether it's regional or global value chains. But when it comes to food insecurity, is the production of the staple crops in these countries. Without having some sort of an emergency plan with the WTO as a convener, bringing in all the stakeholders around the table, this just goes by the wayside. But it's become a very, very important because the fragility of a lot of these countries are at stake. So I think the WTO has a convening power to bring in partners that can facilitate a dialogue that leads to innovative financing that will bring in private sector innovation, particularly around, sustainable agriculture, around, building the capacity of extension services. I know in Liberia, extension services is very expensive. Building human capacity around extension services is very expensive across most LDCs. Most agriculture ministries do not have the budget to continuously build the capacity of extension services to learn new techniques and new technology to improve agricultural outcomes. So most farmers, after going through the stress of acquiring the seeds and tilling the land and then planting, lose on average 40% of their harvests because, one, the whole system of supporting those small farmers from farm to market is lacking and is faced with many challenges. And this cannot be done by the public sector alone. It requires creating an incentive, creating an environment where the private sector is incentivized to make the investment and to compete and drive new innovations. And I think this is the WTO with this convening power can facilitate the dialogue that will lead to showcasing new innovations that is being tested and experimented across member countries that may be transferable, that can lead to scalability through a network. Second, I think the Aid for Trade program has done a lot of research and they provide a lot of intelligence in terms of what are the blockages that are getting in the way of trade, whether the government is committed to export diversification or improving standards so that more products have access to different markets. In Liberia, we have duty-free, quota-free access to the Chinese market. We have under the Everything But Arms Agreement and the EPA, we have access to the European markets. And you will be how shocked often our entrepreneurs, our agriculture entrepreneurs, how shocked they are when they start that process of trying to export into those markets and are met with so many non-tariff measures and are not able to meet the standards, meet the SPS requirements, partly because maybe the standard authority may not have the necessary capacity, may not have the necessary ISO certifications to be able to test and qualify the products for export. So a lot of research has been done, but some of that research needs to now focus on scalability of local production for staple foods to tackle food insecurity. And that research needs to look at how do you strengthen resilience to current exported commodities. we saw a 13% drop in exports for some of our agricultural products in Liberia. And I know this is similar to many countries, many LDCs, due to the COVID pandemic and other challenges globally. The third thing I would like to talk about is the Aid for Trade program. And again, the transferability of the experiences and best lessons learned from other markets. So building that knowledge sharing across LDCs to look at how do you take innovations, build an ecosystem, whether it's in the public sector around government policy, a government industrial policy. Getting government policies to align first is going to be is really going to help that effort. It means that the national industrial policy, trade policy, investment policy, monetary policy, all have to be aligned to move production towards scalability, particularly for staple foods. And then secondly, for export diversification. In Liberia, we tried a number of things. One, the president, I think to this day, continuously signed an executive order waiving duties and fees on agriculture inputs for particular sectors. I think that is one way to try to incentivize more private sector investment. Financing remains a challenge, building even banks' capacity to finance agriculture. Liberia used to have a specialized bank, the Agriculture Bank, that had trained people there that understood the agricultural cycle and knew that agriculture needed patient capital. And so they work with farmers. So building financial institution capacity to really think out of the box. And financial institutions, when I was in public service, would say, yes, they're interested in thinking outside of the box, but government has to mitigate the risk in investing in agriculture. So government has to have their skin in the game. So how do we incentivize financial institution, private sector, financial institution investment into agriculture around critical commodities, around what is export diversification or local production, or in improving outcomes in terms of access to regional value chains? One, the monetary policy has to see how best you provide special guarantees or incentives to attract innovative entrepreneurs that bring new thinking into investing in agriculture. Now, when it comes to sustainable agriculture, yeah, again, public sector can't do it alone. You need private sector innovation to do that. And I think this is where the Aid for Trade program can also rally some of the best lessons learned across the globe in LDCs to see how best some of those ideas are transferable and scalable. And then finally is looking at how do you attract large-scale investment the same way we attract large-scale investment for cash crops. How do you attract large-scale investment for production on the continent in LDCs? Now, if you were to go and talk to Louis Dreyfus, they will say, well, we're doing a number of things looking at new innovations in terms of rice production. Okay, but we need government to provide the policy space that help to mitigate the risk of any investment. How do you build government capacity to do that? I think that requires a lot of support. And so with those few comments, I look forward to questions and further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I want to especially thank you for bringing the peace angle in, as you did at the start. I would be remiss not to, I suppose, plug the work that you do with the Trade for Peace initiative and as part of the Trade for Peace podcast series that the WTO launches. It is critical to remember that as much as this is a conversation about livelihoods and hunger, it is also really a question about stability, both both locally, regionally, and globally, as so often price hikes in food commodities are one of the sparks to the flame that leads to instability. So I thank you very much for bringing that in at the start, as well as for really a comprehensive picture of what can be done. So thank you very much for that. I might now turn to our final speaker, Ahmad. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a huge investor around the world in terms of trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And I know that the foundation really focuses on kind of data-driven big investments to try to achieve systemic change. And I also know that both the foundation and you personally have been making hunger and addressing hunger a priority for a very long time. I wonder if you could talk us through where the foundation sees sort of the big picture around hunger, especially in terms of coming challenges in coming years, and where it feels more can be done multilaterally.
Thanks, Dimitri. Thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate the interventions from my colleagues. Since we're at time, I'll try to be brief. So I'll set the scene by pointing out the political context that we're in. We're now in the midst of the second food price crisis since the inception of the modern WTO. This is significant because we have very few disciplines on restrictions on exports in a meaningful way, and we're still talking about productivity and production in a way that we have been since the 70s. This speaks to the importance of an unfinished, uncompleted agenda. So it was wonderful to hear nearly all of my colleagues on the panel speak in some way to the importance of increasing agricultural production or productivity. Fortunately, since 2015, we've had the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have global, national, regional, private, civil society consensus on the most specific set of targets that we've agreed to in development. And among them, we do have consensus on the need to double small-scale producer productivity, income, and to do so sustainably. At the Foundation, we've been proud to invest in synthesizing the evidence that delivers an answer on how we might do so. So for that, I'll point you to the Series 2030 project and a Nature Journal focused publication, which tells us what the most effective interventions in this area would be. This included a review of nearly 500,000 articles from by about 90 lead authors in 25 countries. So very, very rigorous effort. To your point on the foundation having a very data or evidence-driven approach to problems. So it's great to see that we have attention, we have the relevant political context, and we have the evidence on what we should act upon. For me, what this really means, what we're missing, is execution. We have 46 LDCs, members of the WTO. We have 27 low-income countries across the UN system and the World Bank's group classification. This is a very powerful group of countries if they can act together to get the multilateral system, be it the multilateral trading system or be it the agricultural development architecture, to deliver on their very specific needs. Since we have an agreement on a particular outcome that we can drive towards, I think the political onus is on us and the member countries to determine how we can hold the relevant institutions to account to help them achieve their agreed development goals and targets. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dimitri.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. It's very fitting to have you talk about the I suppose the power and the strength of the LDC group working in concert when we have the LDC group's focal point for agriculture on the stage, who really has to do the work of aligning and being the voice for his group on agricultural issues, and by all accounts is doing a phenomenal job. So thank you very much for finishing on that. I realize we are pushing time, and that is in large part due to our late start. We've had some fantastic interventions from our panelists, but I know we have some questions from online, and I wonder if I could turn it over to Gare to throw us just a couple of these before we wrap up.
works. So we have 3 questions from online attendees. And the first one that I'd like to start with is from Naiwa Hasawi. And the question is, how can we balance between attracting foreign investment in LDC's food production, technology and financing, and assuring sustainable agriculture? And then moving on from that, what are the recommendations of Dr. Adi concerning the role that can be played by policymakers or by lobbies? In addition to that, I have 2 questions which are somewhat linked. The first one is from Udara Hemashchandra on how can the organic agriculture compete with non-organic agriculture in LDCs? And the second question, which is from an anonymous attendee, is like to know what are the speakers' view on using genetically modified seeds for boosting production?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I might start with that first question to ask in terms of your recommendations for policymakers in LDCs, in part about balancing that gap between the financing challenges and improving agricultural sustainability. And then perhaps I might turn to perhaps Ahmad, since you have a more truncated role, to speak to some of these questions around the organic versus non-organic agriculture, and these questions around GMOs and where the foundation sees the potential there. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dimitri, and thank you, Najwa, for your question. I think policymakers, as I stated earlier, are dealing with challenges I wouldn't want any government official in their current capacity. If you think about it, food challenges in terms of shortages or price hikes, fuel challenges and transportation. Okay. Countries like foreign exchange challenges in terms of paying for imports, especially for the primary staple. Okay. And then you have still the remnants of the impact of COVID. One of the things I often would advise is that for any country, policymakers would make every effort with whatever technical assistance they can get to try to see how best they look at strategic sectors and do their best to align key policy instruments. And those key policy instruments is basically your monetary policy, your fiscal policy, your trade policy, investment policy, industrial policy. And why is this important? So for example, we try to improve domestic rice production in Liberia, while ensuring that we have a steady supply of rice by maintaining a buffer stock, by managing a relationship with our suppliers from abroad. Okay. On the monetary side, the central bank, we work with the central bank to make sure that we had a window for an auction of foreign exchange to service importers' requests to purchase imports to maintain a 3-month buffer stock, so that we're not hit with the price volatility on the global market so immediately. Okay, so that's one side of sort of working with the central bank. At the fiscal policy implementation, we work with the Ministry of Finance to see how they could work with the central bank to provide foreign exchange that government is collecting through natural revenue channels, to make that available to the central bank. Again, at the time we're dealing with this during the Ebola crisis. We also then work with the investment side to see how best we work with the investment promotion authority to provide incentive to boost local production, so that there are more operators scaling up their investment in terms of local production, working with partners like FAO and the WFP. We also then work with other institutions to see how best, for example, the school feeding program. in order to incentivize the private sector, we work with the Ministry of Education to say, look, any operator, any partner supporting the school feeding program must use locally produced rice. Automatically, local rice producers now had buyers of their harvest, and we're able to bring both parties to the table to negotiate a price. So that helped to incentivize rice producer because you now had school feeding programs that were using the local rice. We also then took a government-wide commitment, what we call Eat Your Pride. Again, where government was providing rice to civil servants, to hospitals, then government purchased the local rice at a negotiated price with the local growers. Again, trying to build a market around local rice production. But we were not able to achieve scalability because we needed to attract adequate and patient capital to really take the experience of cocoa production and rubber production and see how do we incentivize the private sector for large scale production around rice. And that is the missing middle in terms of attracting large enough investment to scale up local production and incentivize the entire value chain from farm to marketing, including the extension services, including fertilizer access, including storage, including packaging to get it to the market at a price that is competitive and acceptable. So those are something I think policymakers can do. Now, at the WTO level, I think working with ambassadors, we did our very best to make sure that the LDCs group were advocating for some of the same thing Ahmad spoke about at the multilateral level. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for the visual glitch as we lose Angelica as we've gone over time. I might just very briefly then throw it to Ahmad and reframe the question ever so slightly to perhaps make it more concise. Given the trends and given some of the challenges coming down the pipe, do you think that there is a sort of binary choice in order to remain competitive that LDCs have to adopt the kind of new seed varietals coming out of some of the large agribusinesses, or is there a way that they can remain competitive through more traditional methods and through modifying traditional methods?
From the foundation's perspective, the last kind of review that we had of the current genetic varieties in use across the subcontinent of Sub-Saharan Africa, I believe on average it was about 33 years old. The average varietal being used for crop production is at least 3 decades old. For farmers to succeed in a changing climate, we will need to adopt new techniques and varieties to ensure the success. From our broader perspective, science-based regulation and science-based approaches to ensuring that farmers have what they need in their toolkit is the best that we can do given the challenges that we face at the moment.
Thank you. I think that's a good place to finish on. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Omar Sise. Thank you to Annette here with us at the Graduate Institute. And thank you in absentia to Angelica, to Minister Axel Adi, and to Ahmad. Thank you to all of you for joining us, especially to those of you who posed questions to our panel. We very much hope to see you at our future events, as well as the event tomorrow on the digitalization of agri-food systems that our colleagues at the FAO are delivering in Rome and online. And finally, a big thank you to our technical team, who as always have worked wonders in the face of all sorts of last minute changes, glitches, and confusion. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you soon.